Tilden Moschetti joins me, and you can learn how his team can help you by going to moschettilaw.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. But we're going to do a Syndication 101 session today. I really appreciate your time, Tilden.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on my show. I've heard quite a few episodes and really found them enjoyable myself. So.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. It's great to get some feedback. So at the end of the show, I hope you can give me a little direct feedback as to how I can improve the
Sure.
show.
Absolutely. I'm not sure there's much to improve on. You're doing a great job.
Well, one of the things that we're talking about is going to be a Syndication 101 because, like I mentioned before we hit record, I think there's a lot of aspirational endeavors here where people are looking to move into not only multifamily investing. A lot of real estate investors start off wholesaling, they do the single family homes, multifamily, but now syndication is aspirational. And I want to arm everybody with kind of like at least a high level thought process of what they're getting themselves into. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on your background and all that. We're going to kind of get into the meat of it. And because I'm sure they can learn more about your background by just going to your website. Again, that is going to be moschetttilaw.com. Where should we start? I'm going to let you lead the show here today.
Sure. Absolutely. So let's start at kind of the beginning. So a lot of times when I have somebody who's interested in syndication and they haven't done it before, they normally do come to me the way you were talking about. So they've bought some homes before, or they've done a few multifamily deals, and really they're either looking to grow their business and really expand and do this like really full time, or they're looking for just another mechanism because a lot of their friends are saying, hey, we'd like to invest alongside you. So how can we do that better? So normally it's either they've already got a property in mind or something like that, or they've got investors in mind, or sometimes they don't know exactly which way to start. But at every point in the syndication journey, you are always doing two things, right? You're always looking for new deals, and you're always looking for investors. So no matter if you think you have the right investors, you still need more. And no matter if you think you've got the perfect deal flow, you're always looking for new deals. So those are probably the things that start and kind of continue regardless. So when people are really decided, okay, well, this is something that I want to do. I want to start a syndication or I want to start a fund. For me, the two are basically the same thing. Either way, it's a bunch of investor money that you're going to do something with. It's really time to start narrowing down exactly what the plan's going to be. And so I call the big overarching plan the founder investment. So, and that's really coming up ultimately with what's the story of my investment that I'm going to be telling investors. Am I going to be doing value add apartment deals in this geographic location? Or am I doing assisted living projects in this sort of location? Or am I doing kind of across the spectrum, industrial projects that look like this? Whatever it is, and how it relates to you. I mean, why are you the syndicator or the sponsor of this deal the right thing to come about? Because ultimately, that's what sponsors are going to have to answer is, why them? Because there are other syndicators and other sponsors. Once that's done, then it really becomes talking with investors, getting people lined up, and mostly it's, hey, if I did XYZ, is that something that you might be interested in investing in? And start building out that list of soft commits. On the other end of it, at the same time, you're doing the, look for the right kind of investments that you want to be buying. It's swell when they coincide and they happen at the same time, but most of the time they happen kind of, one's really well set up and then finally, okay, now we found the deal, or well, we found a deal, now we need to make sure we have enough investors. But in either case, you're running both tracks, hard and fast at once. Continually lining up investors, getting the deal done, and making sure that happens. Did that answer the question well?
Yeah, that was great. So, one of the things that I'd like to take a second and talk about too is that there's essentially a couple different types of syndications, right? Could you talk about the two different types and what the difference are between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about syndications versus funds.
No, I'm trying to think of what is like. Ones are you need to have accredited investors, the other ones
Oh, okay,
you
sure.
don't.
Sure, we can go through that. So there's two basic rules under Regulation D. So Regulation D is the overarching exception to having to register the security. It's filed with the SEC, not registered. So the two main rules that everybody uses are Rule 506B and Rule 506C. They work independently of each other. You don't do both at the same time. You choose one, and that's the one that you do. So Rule 506B, actually, let me talk about both of them first. So both of them let you raise an unlimited amount of money from an unlimited amount of accredited investors. But Rule 506B allows you to raise money from non-accredited investors. The problem with 506B, or not the problem, the constraint is that you aren't allowed to do a general solicitation. So you can't put on the internet, hey, I'm raising money for 123 Main Street. Under Rule 506C, you can put that general solicitation out there. You can put a billboard on Main Street, you can put it on the internet, whatever to get your investors. The constraint there is we need to verify that every single investor is an accredited investor.
And how would you verify to make sure that you're following the necessary rules? What type of documentation would you require?
So normally that it's all spelled out in the private placement memorandum which rule set you're going for. It's a lot. It's the SEC is told on the Form D that's submitted. It says, "Hey, I'm filing this under Rule 506B, or I'm filing it under Rule 506C." There's a bunch of other formats in the Form D, but for 99.9% of the people, it's going to be 506B or 506C. The In order to get somebody accredited, in order to verify it, there's companies that do that. Or a lot of people will just get a letter from their accountant, and then the sponsor calls the accountant and says, hey, did you really send that letter? They said, yes. That's enough to say, okay, we've taken reasonable steps in order to determine that they're accredited.
So, would you say that's like one of the most important places to start then? Do you have to decide which you're going to be a B or C? Is that one of the more important steps?
It's certainly, yeah, it's a major step because if I'm going, and it really the answer that you're going to choose boils down to where your investors are going to be coming from. If you know everybody that's going to be doing your investment, you're not going to put them through the task of verifying their accredited investor status because you already know everybody. So you won't need to make that solicitation. You're going to choose a 506B. If you think, well, I know I'm going to need to advertise, then it's going to be Rule 506C. But the decision comes because if I think I'm going to have to advertise, as soon as I start putting it out there in the marketplace, right? As soon as I'm putting it on the internet or getting that billboard up about my offering, at that point, I've kind of closed the door on 506B. I can't just do a 506B anymore because I've already done the general solicitation. So the presumption would be that I found all my non-accredited investors through the advertising, which isn't allowed, which is a violation of the rules. So oftentimes we'll start with framing it as a 506B just to be on the safe side, and then put it together and then decide later, okay, we're going to move that into a 506C, at which point then we're not taking in any more non-accredited investors.
So, with all that being said, you mentioned that you don't need to have the accredited investor information if you already know them. Is there some sort
Yeah.
of documentation you have to put in place to validate that you already knew them? Or what do you have to do for that?
No, you just have to have. So we give our clients an investor questionnaire that goes through the process so that the investor themselves gets to self-select. They get to say whether they are an accredited investor or not. As long as the sponsor has a good faith belief that they are indeed, if they say they're an accredited investor, then they are, then that's fine. You can take their word for it. it doesn't come off the count of the number of non-accredited investors that you're allowed to have in one of these offerings. So normally we'll use the investor questionnaire, and that also kind of it sets everything up well for the sponsor, not only because all their information is there, but then if there was ever an inquiry, they've got, well, this is what the investor told me about how they knew that they were sophisticated enough to invest in these products.
So earlier you also mentioned, it's 506B and C. If you go the C route and you want to do the advertising, are there things that you can and cannot say in promoting these things?
There are, but it's not as constrained as you might think. So mostly you don't want to go out and say that it's guaranteed, because it's certainly not a guaranteed return. An investment by its nature is never guaranteed. So, your your investors are not 100% promise that they're going to get their money back. You're going to do your best for them, obviously, but it's never a promise. And then the rest of it is really, it's highly encouraged. I highly encourage my clients to put, for accredited investors only in the advertisement, just because then it's going to keep down the number of non-accredited investors that are responding. And so it's just simpler to be spending time with people who can invest versus the people who aren't going to be able to invest anyway.
Well, you probably have experienced this marketing wise then, or seen all kinds of things. How have you found some of the best approaches in order to find those initial investors?
So, it always comes down still to sphere of influence. So even if you are doing a 506C offering, your best way always begins at home anyway. So those are the people that you know very well, because you can put an advertisement out there, and many times if you have a good marketing team, they can drive investors to you. But the most cost-effective people are going to be the people that you know anyway. So you're always going to be looking at your investor base and talking to those people that you know, the people that already trust you, because nobody's going to invest with you anyway until they start building that level of trust. And if that trust is already there, then you're halfway to a deal anyway. So it's building that sphere of influence. And if it's a 506C, then it's having those people who are also good influencers on their own network put out the word and try and get people, more and more investors, to at least talk with you and find allies who can bring you more people to your deal.
Well, when it comes to taxes and laws, things seem to be changing on a regular basis. Is that something we should be aware of? Has there been any recent changes or anything on the horizon that you foresee that we should be privy to?
In terms of, there hasn't been taxes changes all the time. Fortunately, I'm not a tax attorney, so we refer to tax attorneys all the time to do that end of it. In the security space, it's more, there are directions that I feel like are going, and the winds of securities laws are shifting, but it's not anything on the horizon of this is about to change. Things that I think are likely to happen in the next few years, I would think that we probably will see over the next 2 or 3 years a shift of what constitutes an accredited investor. The last accredited investor report came out in December of last year, made it pretty clear that they weren't shifting it yet. They weren't going to make it more difficult to be qualified as an accredited investor. That the SEC was very cautioned on that it was likely that was coming in the future, that there were the SEC's main concern is protecting the public. And what it really wants to do is make sure that people who are getting into these deals know what they're doing, and also have that backstop, aren't risking everything that they've got into an investment that could lose money, and people end up bad at the end of the day. So I think we probably will see some tightening on accredited investor. And I definitely think as more and more people do syndications and funds, we've seen some sponsors really try and push the envelope of what's permissible and what's not. Things like almost like a self-directed fund, where you have the sponsor basically setting up multiple funds of funds under one umbrella in order so that they are almost acting like a broker dealer for investment funds. I think we're going to see some litigation probably on something like that. Not that I know that for sure, but it's, that's my guess, is that that'll be a major concern. State regulators are getting concerned about whether or not things are being put together as complete as possible for specifically for non-accredited investors. So I would expect a few more inquiries to happen over the next little bit into that. So really it's going to be a general push into protecting the investing public and just making sure that the standards are there, that it's just not people putting together offerings that aren't viable at the end of the day.
Sure. Just to remind everybody, you could learn more about what Tilden is up to by going to moschettilaw.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor and share this with one of your investor friends. And if you're finding us on YouTube, please give us a like and a subscribe there as well. So, Tilden, my mind is kind of going all over the place right now, and I'm going to try to focus on the concept of this. You make some of this sound fairly easy, but I know that that's like a pro athlete making basketball look easy. There's got to be a lot going on here. What type of, it's obvious that anybody's good that's going to tackle this is going to need legal help. Like, what type of questions should we be asking as investors to make sure that that lawyer knows what they're doing and that they're a good fit?
Well, it's certainly a good idea to discuss any PPM or offering that you're any offering that you're interested in investing in with an attorney to help you through that. Now, we don't represent investors, but that happens fairly often. Or at least an accountant to say, hey, do I understand the tax rules, and how this is going to affect me? There are companies out there that help by validating to make sure that these are reasonable investments. But I think the most important thing is to take any deal at the end of the day and look at it from two lenses. Like, the first lens is kind of like the emotional lens. Does this deal make sense? Like, if you were going to buy this deal all cash and there were none of the players involved, there wasn't a sponsor, but you had all the cash to do it, is this the kind of deal you'd want to do? The answer is yes, that's great. So now you've got part of the answer. The answer is no, you probably should look elsewhere. If you've got a funny feeling about it, you probably should look elsewhere. The second lens is really your analytical lens. It's helpful to understand investments and understand how they work. And as you're looking through the materials that any sponsor gives you and going through those, do they add up? I mean, does this seem like, oh, okay, this all makes sense. I can see how this is going to happen, and it's going to get me those kind of returns? Or are they promising pie in the sky and a 50% IRR with a 2-year hold, but all these rainbows are going to happen, but you can't figure out how they're going to get from point A to point Z? Maybe you need to find out some more questions. Maybe you have some more questions, because really at the end of the day, it's that deal and how it works. If the PPM doesn't look professional, if the operating agreement doesn't look professional, I'd be worried too, because we spend a lot of time, certainly with my clients. I know other attorneys, they spend time too. We really need everybody's documents to look good, because it shows the level of professionalism that the sponsor's bringing to the table. If they're sloppy and written with a crayon, it's probably not a good deal.
Well, let's say you're going to be doing your first syndication and you're going to vet out a lawyer. What questions should we be asking to make sure that lawyer is a good fit?
I think fit is kind of the most important thing. So, what I bring to the table is I'm one of the few syndication attorneys that's done my own deals, that actively does deals. So I've got the boots on the ground experience as well as the legal. And I want to help my clients succeed, like walk them through. If they don't understand how to do something, let's get on the phone, let's go through it. So, really so that they can understand this is what we do. Make sure that there's a good communication base, right? So that the lawyer's easy to get a hold of, that you get answers to your questions, and that way you can really understand, okay, what's happening. Like I just got off the phone today with a client who had a major emergency, and they were able to call me and get the answer to that emergency because they kind of needed to know like today, like within the hour. Fortunately, we were able to do that, but there those things come up fairly regularly where they feel very urgent because you've got investors asking. And so it's for the sponsor, it's going to feel very, very important and like they need to get this answer done. And a lot of times they do want to get that answer done and to their client as quickly as possible. So just make sure that that's going to be something that's going to be feasible. So to make sure that you're working together with the same sort of level of expectations from each other.
Well, one of the other things too is that, you would be handling, a lawyer like you would be handling the syndication aspect. You kind of alluded to the concept of there's going to be tax attorneys involved as well. Is there anybody else, like a vital piece of the team that needs to be considered?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to just understand how the deal is going to get done. So you may not have a tax attorney, you may just have a good accountant. We normally give referrals to some great accountants that know this space inside and out and know much, much more than any syndication attorney possibly could about taxes. We know more about the legal part of it. They know a lot more about and just making sure there's a good fit there. But you want to make sure that, are we going to be able to deliver well? Are we going to be relying on, if it's a development project, how are we going to be selling the property at the end? What's our team look like there? It doesn't have to be part of your internal team, but you certainly need to have those external relationships built out. So really it's accountants, it's the lawyer. Many times there will be a real estate attorney in the mix as well. And a lot of times there doesn't have to be any communication or very little communication between the different attorneys or accountants, which helps keeps costs down for people. But normally it is just kind of a recognition of this is what our role is and this is what we do.
So this has been a lot of great information, Tilden, and I really appreciate you giving everybody this level of insight and tolerating some of my questions here. But so I'd be curious, and to get into some details. I would imagine that during the process now you're raising capital, and now you're being held accountable. I mean, you should feel accountable to these investors. Is there any type of reporting or documentation, anything that needs to be presented to those investors on a regular basis? What is that communication channel? How should that look?
Yeah, there's not the rule is actually pretty sparse. So it's you need to be communicating with them one time a year, which is I think way too little. You'll have very mad investors if you're doing that. I think it's the best practice is communicate at least once a quarter to your investors. And it's not just hey, things are going fine, but a real good review of, this is how much money we have in the bank. This is how much money we're looking to spend. We think these are things are coming up that are expenses, all to give the impression of, hey, look, we have investor money. We take investor money very, very seriously. It's not our money, it's yours. And so we need to be good shepherds of it. And this is what we're doing of it. So I like to advise clients to say, if you were an investor in this deal, answer it to the amount of information that you'd like to know. Not just something quick, but something that's detailed so that they can really get like a full picture of the story. So it's probably a fairly lengthy, email communication with photographs, I think are always helpful. Some level of numbers is helpful. But really it's, that quarterly regular info. And then of course, always inviting investor feedback and phone calls. It's investors really don't take sponsors up on it enough, but they always should feel welcome to give a call, to send an email, to get any questions answered, just so that they feel comfortable about where their money's going and how it's being used.
That's some great feedback and tips. Well, Tilden, this has been a great conversation. Before we jump into the rapid fire questions, is there a questions or concept you think we should have covered here today?
Well, I think one thing that a nuance that I think that I hope came out is that I know that it all seems extremely daunting. I know when I did my first deal about 10 years ago, it was hard to understand, and I came up with this idea of it's kind of like an alphabet soup, because you got the 506C and Reg D and all these letters and all these things going on. And so it certainly can be overwhelming and seem like something that you can't do. But that's not the case. You can do it. If you've got a good business sense, if you're an honest and trustworthy person, and you can do good deals, that's what it's going to take in order to be a successful syndicator. So, a lot of my process with my clients is hand holding, making sure that they understand and making sure they know what the next thing to do is, just so that they can get to that next level, because it is something that is doable, and it is something that's approachable by people, whether they've just, bought or sold a few homes for investment, or whether they've done huge deals. I mean, it's all doable. You just need to make sure you have the right team that can help you along the way.
Well, to remind everybody, MoschettiLaw.com. Take a look and see if Tilden can help you with your first syndication. Well, if you are ready, Tilden, we'll jump into the rapid fire questions.
Sure, let's do it.
Well, first of all, what lie do real estate investors sometimes tell themselves and others?
I think the worst lie they say is that they tell themselves it's a great deal because they have a lot invested in it. So a lot of their time invested into it. And the best deal, the the way to make the best money is to not be afraid to walk away from a deal that's just not going to work. But I think too many times people go into a deal thinking it's going to work out, and then as new information gets on, starts looking like it's not going to work out that great, and people don't walk away.
Do you have a book recommendation, or what are you reading right now?
My book recommendation is a series called Sports for the Soul. It's by Derek Donnelly. I always recommend it. It's a series of 4 or 5 books that uses sports as a metaphor for really changing your life. So about making sure that you're ambitious and that you can achieve your goals.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Get started in this business sooner. I started doing syndications 10 years ago. I've been an attorney for 20 years. I wish I had started when I was 20 years ago.
What single strategy, process, or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time-saving impact to your business?
Processes for follow-up with investors has been the most. And so I use a CRM in order to do that. It's a homegrown CRM, but there's other products out there that do just as well. But having an actual process for follow-up and making sure that follow-up gets done is critical.
Well, Tilden, this has been a fantastic conversation. I know that my listeners have gotten a ton of value out of this. One more time, it is MoschettiLaw.com. You can find that as a clickable link in the show notes, but really appreciate your time. It was great meeting you.
Thanks. It was really great to be on your show.